But right here, see where we're using button 1? I'm going to have it use btn. Okay. The function will not care which button it needs to change the color to. It won't know if it's button 1, button 2, button 3, or button 4. All it knows is it's told, change the color for this button. Okay? It'll make sense in a little bit. So I'm gonna, to make this fast, I copied the name btn up here, and now I'm going to replace everywhere where I see button 1 with btn. Okay. Now there's one thing left to do. Can you guess what that is? That's right, we need to call the function. And we're going to call it from each one of our click handlers. And the way you call a function is you type its name, set color, and there it is in my list, setcolorifs, and you pass it the button that you want to change. Because this is button 1's click handler, we want to pass it button 1. Alright? And now, let's see if this works. Sure enough, I can change button 1's color. I can still change the other ones, but these are still using the old code. So I'm going to change those too. So in button 2's handler, I'm going to delete the contents of that function. So it's now an empty function. And I am going to call setcolorifs, and I'm going to pass it button 2. Okay? Like that. And of course, because you're calling the function, you want to have a semicolon at the end. Okay? You only not have a semicolon when you're going to follow that line with a pair of curly braces. And I'm going to do the same thing for buttons 3 and 4. So let's recap. Each button's click handler calls setcolorifs and passes to it the name of the button that it wants to change. So obviously, if we click button 1, we want to change the colors for button 1. Click button 2. Obviously, you want to change the color for button 2, and so on. Okay? And setcolorifs is defined up here, and you pass it a button that inside of this function we just call it btn. Okay? And we just use the same logic we used earlier in this program to change its color depending on what its current color is, right? So let's make sure this works. Looks good. Okay. Now, let me show you something else that you can do. When Windows calls our handler, or any handler, it usually passes automatically, this isn't anything that you write, it passes 2 arguments. The first one of these is of type object, and it's called sender. And what this is the actual object that got clicked, which in this case would be button 1. Okay? And what you can do is, instead of explicitly passing button 1 to the setcolorifs function, you can actually pass sender. Okay? Actually, you can't just pass sender, you have to cast it to type button, like this. So what does this say? Call setcolorifs and pass to it the object sender, but cast it as a type button. Okay? Everything in C# is an object. This is the most basic, the most fundamental data type. Just like a chair is a thing and a computer is a thing. They're both things, but one's a chair and one's a computer. So you can get more specific. You can actually tell C#, treat this thing, sender, as a button. Now this will only work if sender really is a button, which in this case it is. So, but what's cool about this is that we don't care what the button is called. Windows passes to us button 1, and I don't care if I renamed it to button willy-nilly. It'll still get passed to this function. It doesn't care what it's called. For all I know, it's called sender, and I can pass it to my setcolorifs function, and this will work. Still works. Now watch this. See how in all the other calls we were passing button 2 in one of them, passing button 3 in another. Well, we can just pass button sender for all of them. And see, it's the same code now. All 4 of these functions have exactly the same code in them. And it'll work because Windows will put into this variable sender, it'll put the actual button that got clicked when this function got called. And only button 1 will cause this function to get called. Only button 2 will cause this function to get called, and so on. So it automatically knows. Alright, so that works. So what's the benefit of this? Well, first of all, we only have one function that we need to change if we want to add colors to our sequence, or if we want to change some of the colors. We only change the code in one spot. And then because this code has a name, we called it setcolorifs, we can then call it from our other functions, from our click handler functions, and they all can use the exact same code. And because I'm taking advantage of the object that has been passed to our click handler, that is the actual button we want to change the color for, then we can have the exact same code in each of these click handlers, which is really nice. It's less maintenance for us. Now, for something as simple as this, it's not as big of a deal. But when your programs get more and more complicated, this can be a lifesaver.